All right. Well, thank you all again for joining our monthly webinar. I'm Justin Rowling, the the VP of National Sales for PharmaForce. We do this monthly, so all of you that are returning guests, thank you for attending this webinar, and everyone that's new, thank you for your attendance. I hope you find this helpful as the 340B environment changes, it seems like daily. And so we like to offer some information to our customers and for any of the other companies out there. And so we're going to go through, we'll get this over to Anthony. He's going to go through the presentation, but a few housekeeping things. If you have questions, just please go to the chat box and type your question, and we'll address those at the end. And otherwise, again, thank you all for joining. Really appreciate your attendance. And I will kick this over to Anthony.
All right. Thank you, Justin. So for those of you, again, I'm going to echo what Justin just said. Those of you that have been joining us for the last several months as we have been doing these monthly webinars, we want to thank you so much for your time. I want to know the reason why these are 30 minutes is because we know everyone is busy and everyone has a busy schedule in healthcare and pharmacy and in the 340B space. So we really try to give you a lot of good information straight to the point in a short time frame to make sure that you can obtain this information, digest it, and then go about your day and your daily business. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Anthony Velasquez. Our running joke is that I'm the webinar guy, as I have been called at the 340B conferences. But I have been in the 340B space for over a decade. Primarily have worked a ton on the covered entity side for grantees, hospitals, and different entity types. And I have spent the last 5 years, going on 6, working at PharmaForce, a 340B third-party administrator. So I'm able to sort of blend that mix of the covered entity perspective and the technology and TPA side of things. So let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today. As Justin shared, 340B is changing very, very quickly. Let me start with a disclosure. Nothing in this presentation should be constituted as legal advice. Again, a lot of things that I'm going to be sharing are things that I'm hearing from customers, things that are public, and strategies that we're discussing internally to help covered entities navigate this new world of manufacturer restrictions. Here is the agenda for today. So the funny thing is that I will share is I had to actually change my content because I was prepared to discuss manufacturer blocks, and some of them were the ones that went into effect as of May, and then we just got hit with some new manufacturer blocks, unfortunately. Things are really changing daily, and not for the good at this stage in 340B. I'm hopeful. For those of you that have been 340B for a long time, these are definitely challenging times, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that there will be regulatory or perhaps legal wins that will help covered entities. So I'm hoping for the best, but right now it's a tough time for sure. So I'm going to cover some of the new blocks that have just come out. I'm going to try to go into details on them as well, because I think that's helpful to understand how to dissect one of the manufacturer letters. We're going to talk about the legal and regulatory landscape and what is going on there. Talk about compliance, ordering strategies, and ideas to consider and minimize impact. So let's start with the new wave of blocks. So as you all know, in 2023, there have been some major changes. In April, Amgen announced a new policy and restrictions. AbbVie announced restrictions effective 4/17/2023. Pfizer announced manufacturer restrictions to contract pharmacies effective 5/1/2023. GSK announced manufacturer restrictions effective 5/1/2023, as well as Novartis. So covered entities were dealing with that big wave of changes. There are so many now. I want to say there's like 25 plus manufacturer changes combining both what I will call policy 1 and policy 2, where a manufacturer might have come out with initial policy in 2021, 2022, and then now is coming out with an updated policy that further restricts 340B, and it's very unfortunate to watch. There's some additional restrictions more recently that perhaps a lot of you were not aware of, but there was a restriction by Bayer effective 6/1 2023 on one of their medications. There was a letter from a manufacturer that announced they will no longer honor replenishment for claims that are older than 45 days. So they're basically giving 45-day replenishment. There are some, they're not drugs that I'm at least very familiar with, but I'm sure that some of you are impacted by that. The two major ones are the new Merc policy and the new Sanofi policy, which go into effect. One is on June the 12th and another one is on June the 1st. So let's talk about those in a bit more detail. So there's the Merc policy that goes into effect June 12th. These are all over the place. They continue to be, there's no sort of direction where you can tell exactly what's going to happen. This one applies to hospitals and grantees. It applies on certain Merck products. So we're seeing that too, where initially it was at a labeler code level. So in some of the initial restrictions were for full labeler codes. Now there seems to be a target on certain NDCs. I'm not sure what the thought there is. Perhaps the manufacturers are thinking that they can say, that they're not blocking all drugs, but I don't think that they care at this point. And unfortunately, we're at a point where we need to have either Congress intervene or there to be a change in the legal landscape of things. Another thing to note with this Merck letter is you must designate or redesignate your contract pharmacy by 5/26. So if you don't have an in-house pharmacy, you can designate one contract pharmacy, and they are making you designate and redesignate if you already selected one by May the 26th. So note that date, because that's a very critical and important date if you are going to opt in to get 340B pricing at one of your pharmacies. A very interesting change, though, that I think is a newer thing that we're going to see is that Merck is saying there's no longer a need for claims data submission, but you still use the 340B ESP platform to designate the pharmacy or the contract pharmacy that you would like to obtain 340B pricing on. So that's very, very interesting that that we are seeing that wholly owned pharmacies are no longer exempt and must be designated as a contract pharmacy. So in some of the previous policies, wholly owned or system owned pharmacies were exempt from having 340B pricing blocked. That looks to have also changed, unfortunately. Moving on to the Sanofi, this is effective June 1st. So this is coming very, very quickly. This update only applies to hospitals. If an entity has an in-house pharmacy, it can no longer receive 340B medication at a contract pharmacy. If an entity then does not have an in-house pharmacy, it can designate one contract pharmacy. Again, no need for claims data submission. So this impacts 28 plus medications. This is a very significant manufacturer restriction for hospitals. Sanofi is a maker of several insulin products that are fairly common medications that patients use. So this is a very significant hit to the contract pharmacy program for covered entities. Now, I did want to note something very interesting, and I kind of see this as a trend as we take into account all of the the different restrictions that have been coming out for the last couple of months and the last couple of years from manufacturers, they, as I mentioned before in some of the previous webinars, they seem to be all over the place. There's no coordination. Some are NDC specific, some are one drug, some are two products, some are the entire labeler code. The application to whether it applies to community health centers or not seems to be on the fly. Some manufacturers are choosing to apply the blocks to community health centers. Some are not. Some are very specific that it only applies to these types of covered entities, which is very interesting. And I wonder if that's driven by volume, if they're looking at, replenishment volume or sales volume under 340B accounts. And if they see a community health center hitting a certain threshold and they're deciding to block community health centers, which is very unfortunate. One of the things that you want to know as you're evaluating, all of these that are coming super fast, is that the removal of ESP submission is something new. I think that we're seeing. I mean, early on, it was optional, then it became required, and now not required is something very, very new, very interesting to see as a new development. I don't know if a lot of people caught this, but one of the interesting things was that in the designation of the contract pharmacy, you're allowed to do that once a year. So that language is not something that I read explicitly in the last two, but it was in some of the ones that went into effect on May 1st. So be on the lookout for that. If you're designating a pharmacy, you want to pay extra attention that you're designating a pharmacy that is very high volume, that is very stable, that you're not going to be in a situation where you're eliminating that contract or having to terminate that contract because it is a sort of open enrollment period where you would get a shot once a year to designate a pharmacy, which is a terrible piece of policy that these letters are coming with because of all the many different reasons why a covered entity might need to change that. They might be opening a new pharmacy. So if you're in the middle of opening a new in-house pharmacy, you're in the middle of setting up a new contract pharmacy relationship, those are all things that you want to consider as you're doing that. The requirement to designate one wholly owned pharmacy is very interesting. It seems like the 40-mile radius, which was something in the past that was on some letters and it wasn't on others, seems to be more frequent and more consistent. And the fact that some will not allow a contract pharmacy at all if there's an in-house is, I think, one of the most disturbing part of these new wave of manufacturer restrictions. So overall, it's not good. These restrictions are terrible for patients and covered entities and the 340B program as a whole. Now, what are the legal and regulatory landscape updates? What's going on that front? From a legal perspective, there was an appeals court case that the Health and Human Services Department had until 4:30 to submit an appeal on this particular case where it was favorable to the drug makers. I've spoken about this in a previous webinar, but there was a case, and I want to say it was district court in DC, and it favored the drug manufacturers in saying that they essentially could restrict 340B pricing. The government had a chance to appeal that decision. They did not. Unfortunately, there are two federal appeal court cases still pending that, again, I'm hopeful that they could turn the tide a little bit in a different direction, but it looks like this is going to be caught up in legal cases for the immediate and possibly long in the future. From a policy and regulatory perspective, there are some advocacy efforts supporting a bill that will restore full pricing to covered entities. This is a bill from everything that I found, was by Representative Matsui out of California, that is sort of spearheading this with support from covered entities, hospitals, and some of the advocacy organizations. As of yesterday, there was a vote on a bill, HR 3290, which the House panel voted to basically to pass this bill that will limit 340B Medicaid payments. Some of the language indicates that covered entities will be reimbursed by Medicaid managed care companies at the acquisition cost. Again, very not a good bill for covered entities at all. In that same bill, there were provisions that will require annual 340B reporting requirements for DISH entities as well, related to charity care and 340B savings and different things like that. The bill is pending a Senate vote, and there's the belief that there will be changes to that bill that will be proposed by the Senate. So be on the lookout for that. If you are signed up to your 340B advocacy agency, whether it's 340B Health or whether it's NAC or wherever you get your sort of news on 340B, 340B report and others, be on the lookout to see what that might hold and make sure that your covered entity is involved in any way with your government representatives, your representatives in Congress and things like that, to make sure that they know where your entity stands in not supporting any bill that adds unneeded reporting requirements and further restrictions to the 340B program. Now that these strategies are here, unfortunately, we have to live with them. If you're a covered entity, this is very unfortunate. You have to figure out how to adapt. I'm here to give you some tips. So, in terms of your ordering strategies, here's what I think entities. If you're on this webinar, you're a covered entity, and these restrictions impact you, which I'm pretty sure everyone in this webinar that is a hospital or covered entity or a grantee is impacted in some way. The first thing you want to do is review all accumulations related to these products. So you want to go ahead and you want to see how many packages of each of these products that are subject to the manufacturer restrictions where pricing is going to be terminated or removed. How many accumulations do you have pending in your accumulator? So if you have an in-house pharmacy, wholly owned pharmacies, things like that. If you have a contract pharmacy, you want to consider what those accumulations look like. If you have a contract pharmacy and you have a number of packages accumulated that have not replenished for whatever reason, you want to consider what you might be able to do in that situation. If you are an in-house pharmacy, maybe you are using a TPA, maybe you're not. One of the things that you can do is look at how many more packages could you order? Do you track those accumulations and things like that, so that before you lose pricing, you can maximize any savings as much as possible from that manufacturer, from those manufacturer products. Consider space for inventory, specifically if you're an in-house pharmacy. But the other thing that sort of goes hand in hand is work with your contract pharmacies. That is very important. Depending on your TPA, you might have replenishment pending that has not been triggered yet. You might be on a manual replenishment, again, depending on your TPA and your setup, where you might have packages that can be replenished and sent to the contract pharmacy. So you want to inform and you want to collaborate with your contract pharmacy. If you're designating a contract pharmacy, you certainly want to inform them, have that conversation perhaps to make sure you're on the same page about sort of this new change to your 340B program. Work hand in hand with your TPAs and your gateways. I know that there are some gateways who have been proactive in attempting to order out accumulations and things like that prior to the effective date of each of these restrictions. So please reach out to your TPA, reach out to your gateways if that's not something that has already happened, to work with them to make sure that you can maximize your ordering prior to the restriction going into place. And ultimately, what I would recommend is to order accumulations as soon as possible. If you have eligible 340B accumulations in your contract pharmacy program or your in-house pharmacy program, I would order those accumulations to ensure that you're maximizing your replenishment and perhaps even serving cash card patients at the same time as you're doing that before those restrictions kick in. Now, compliance is also a big worry. So not just, ordering and not just the loss of savings, but compliance. As these things are changing, it's becoming very, very difficult to keep up with at this point. Working in a TPA and working with the manufacturer restrictions day in, day out, it is exhaustive to keep up with everything. Now, from a compliance perspective, it is so important to read the fine print. Again, the pharmacy designation of designated one pharmacy a year, given that entities did not get a significant amount of time to analyze and strategize on what pharmacy to select, before they were given sort of this hard day of selecting and designated an ESP. It's just not good across the board. But you want to make sure that if you're deciding that you're going to designate a pharmacy, if you're deciding that you need to follow the instructions on the policy from the manufacturer, it's very important to read the fine print, read the FAQs, so that you can know exactly how this is going to impact your particular program. Don't assume that they're all the same, because they're not. Each policy is very different in terms of the products that it applies to. I think that's one of the big challenges too, is ensuring that the policy is applied evenly or the same across your entire program, especially if you have multiple TPAs. That can be very difficult to keep a track of. If you have in-house pharmacies that are on a separate inventory model, I can see this being very difficult to keep a track of and ensure that you're not ordering things that you don't have pricing for. From a compliance perspective, I think it's very important that you update your internal policies and your workflows. So where you need to, now update your policy of whether you're going to, what pharmacy you're selecting, how you're going to designate, who's going to designate the pharmacy and all of that. And ultimately, you want to audit your blocks and you want to audit your catalogs. You want to audit your blocks because you want to make sure that your third-party administrator is not ordering those drugs after the block has already happened, because that can cost you thousands and thousands of dollars if that is the case. So as soon as the effective date kicks in, those catalogs now have a non-340B pricing loaded on it, and you want to make sure that you avoid ordering and capturing claims that have that incorrect pricing, because it can be costly. You want to audit your catalogs too for the opposite. So if you did designate a pharmacy, that the 340B pricing and the PHS pricing is loaded correctly to that catalog. Now, here are some ideas to consider. Again, some of these things are things that I'm hearing from covered entities in the market that they are doing. One, so a lot of covered entities are concerned, how can I serve my patients? Now, what do I do with, now my cash card patients have very limited places where they can obtain their drugs. If you're a rural covered entity and your patients have the ability to go to any one of your contract pharmacies to obtain their insulin and things like that, now there's going to be that burden where they have to can only obtain it possibly from an in-house pharmacy or a pharmacy that's not even close to their home. So this is a big area that unfortunately is going to be very burdensome for covered entities to figure out how to navigate. What I would recommend is to immediately educate your staff, educate your patients, maybe even put together a brochure of where the patients will be able to go and get their medications. I've seen some covered entities putting together a cheat sheet by manufacturer and where they can go to obtain discounts for cash card patients and start handing that out to those patients to educate them. Unfortunately, it might even become a lot more involved as your team and your staff might have to help the patient find a completely different place and sort of needs a little bit of hand holding on where to get their medication. So that's sort of like, I think the patient is number one. This is something very interesting that keeps on coming up, and it's entities more and more considering a central distribution model. There are some entities that are implementing this, where they are ordering the medications and distributing those medications to the contract pharmacies. Perhaps that's a solution that you could look into. It is something that, again, I'm hearing rumblings on. There have some entities that have implemented a model like this that have been successful, but it is something that you want to consider and discuss with your team and your 340B committee. You definitely want to promote and market your in-house pharmacy more than ever. If you have an in-house pharmacy, that in-house pharmacy is where you're getting 340B pricing. You want to promote, you want to meet with your staff, meet with those office managers, meet with your physicians if possible, have a lunch and learn and educate your staff that patients are going to get the best pricing and it's going to be most beneficial to the covered entity if prescriptions are sent to your in-house pharmacy. There's a lot of questions on this. One of the questions that I often get is, will the manufacturer allow you to designate one in-house pharmacy per location if you have multiple locations under the same HRSA ID? I actually don't know the answer to that. There's still, many questions related to especially the new policies and the new restrictions that have come out. So I don't know. I don't have the answers to every single scenario as it relates to in-house pharmacies. But if you have an in-house pharmacy today, I think one of the things that you should be considering immediately is a way to educate, market, promote the in-house pharmacy as much as possible, as that will hopefully help serve more cash card patients if you have a cash card program, and also capture more 340B prescriptions for those patients who were previously maybe going to the independent or going to one of your Walmart or Walgreens or one of your other contract pharmacy relationships. Additionally, I've said this multiple times, consider opening an in-house pharmacy. I mentioned this in 2 webinars ago when I talked about long-term strategies about considering an in-house pharmacy and what that investment might look like for your covered entity in the long term. Unfortunately, in-house pharmacies or wholly owned pharmacies are now being explicitly targeted in some of these manufacturer restriction letters as well. But that can be a strategy or solution that can help you minimize the impact of these manufacturer restrictions. One of the things that I did when I worked on the covered entity side, especially when we wanted to promote the use of our contract pharmacies or specialty pharmacy that we were working with, was to go and meet with each office manager and the physicians that work in that office to sort of educate on 340B, educate on what was going on in the program and why we needed their help or their buy-in in using a specialty pharmacy that we have been contracted with. I kind of see that as a similar situation where education is so important right now. I know that it's very easy to and it's very difficult to get out of the weeds of all of these restrictions and what do they mean, and certainly provide the impact to your organization. But I think it's important to focus on education and educating your staff, making sure that you have buy-in and support as much as possible to try to get some of those patients that were going to your other contract pharmacies to use your in-house pharmacy or the designated pharmacy to try to minimize the impact as much as possible. as we wait for something positive to happen from a legal or a regulatory and policy perspective, which I am hopeful. I'm going to stay positive on that. I think we should all stay positive. Do what you can, educate your leadership, educate your compliance team, educate your regulatory team if you have, and make sure that you're doing your impact profiles, that you're participating on, different events and reaching out to your representatives in Congress, because I think that's very key in ensuring that, we keep pressure and educating of how important 340B is to covered entities. With that said, there's going to be another webinar. Our June webinar is going to be June 15th. That's a Thursday, on purchasing strategies to maximize 340B savings. We're very excited about that. You won't want to miss that. You'll see that coming out over the next few weeks. This webinar is recorded, and this webinar will be shared, and we'll be sending it out so that you can watch it on our YouTube channel. You can watch it on our website as well. If there's anything here that was helpful that you want to review, you will be able to do that. And with that being said, let's do some Q&A. Just